Hi there, Cell here and welcome to 400 Days of Grand Order. I want to try something a little different for my channel's anniversary. Here I would like to discuss how it was to play the game for a year, at least from my perspective, my viewpoints on the chapters and the events that have come to pass, and my general ups and many downs. Fate Grand Order launched at the beginning of August of last year, but we iOS users had to wait an extra 3 weeks for the game to be approved for the App Store. Apparently we didn't miss much since the first 3 weeks were nothing more than unlimited loading works. So they say. During this time I decided to look into the game's servants and pick the ones I'd like. I decided that I'd like to have Skaha, then I did even more research and found out that she wasn't in the game yet. So I had to look for a more attainable servant that would tickle my fancy. I arrived upon Boudica because she did just that. When we were finally allowed to join the game, we were given 34-ish quartz as compensation. When I got to do the tutorial gacha, I was given Boudica, and I was generally happy at that time. Of course, this was before I knew she was bad. In any case, a mark of a veteran player to me would be a player who happened to have Saber Lily, the pre-registration servant, as the third servant they've ever acquired. As quite a few of you have noticed, my escapades in Fuyuki aren't documented. This is because I was using it as a training grounds to learn the game's mechanics before I started posting on YouTube. It pretty much went okay. It took me a bit to grasp the game's mechanics and whatnot. I didn't die either until I got to Saber Altar at the end of the chapter. That's where I learned that the command seals were used as a free continue. Next we arrive at Orleans, aka Dragon Hellhole. Back when the game first came out, the dragons were a really big issue for the player base, to the point that a lot turned to a 1-star assassin, Sasaki Kojiro, to eliminate them. I didn't use Kojiro myself since I had Jinkei at the time. The dragon struggles was one thing, but I had my own personal issues while going through France. I was originally playing on an iPhone 5, the bare minimum at playing the game. This meant during the recordings large graphical effects would cause the video to freeze up and crash my game. This made some fights incredibly difficult for me, case in point the battle with Jean Alter. Having access to a 4-turnable phantasm meant that I had to figure out a way to kill her before she could use it. This was incredibly difficult at the time since no one had a max ascendant max level servant, so I couldn't just burn through her. After that was said and done, I did some 10 rolls in the hopes of getting Nero. This was before I learned Nero was a chapter unlock, so I'm a little sad for those rolls. Next we moved on to Septem. Here I found some use for Boudica in the form of an anti-Roman buff, but in actuality it wasn't really all that useful. Rome was more of the same for the most part, battles that got more difficult as we went along, and when the dragons came back, it was sort of a, oh you're here, let me deal with you situation. Septem I believe was also the first time we were introduced to the Chimera. Back in the day this guy would tear up everyone with its constant criticals that we couldn't mitigate. In fact, back when people needed Chaos Talons, people would go to the node in Septem where it was located. There they would use Ku Hulain and his gay bulk to try to instantly kill it, and if it failed, they would close their games and attempt again. I never did that because I didn't see the point. Anyways, at the end of Septem, you could say that it was my first meeting with Altera, who many of you should know is my favorite servant in the game. After Septem, I finally acquired my first 4-star servant, Carmilla, who would have been great in Orleans. C'est la vie? Afterwards is when we started to get events, the first being Nero's Colosseum. This event's prize was a CE that granted guts, but did it have a really good picture of Nero on it. The event itself was pretty interesting for the most part. On a daily basis we were charged with fighting a certain thematical team. We would gather medals from these battles and trade them in for Ascension mats that weren't in the game yet. These being Forbidden Pages, Gears of Time, Horseshoes, and Phoenix Plumes. I can safely say that if I had one nemesis in this game, it would be the Phoenix Plumes. Just recently, it took me 4 days to get 4 plumes. This is also the first time we got to see Alyure, who wasn't obtainable at the time. This is also the first time they introduced Gilgamesh to us as an enemy. Needless to say, with his 3-turnable phantasm, it was quite the struggle. This was also when I started going into despair on getting Altera, since this was the first time she had her rate up. The next event was a Mochi event featuring Orion and Artemis. When it came out, I thought to myself that I would really like Orion. For the most part, this event was pretty easy, just gathering more things and trying to finish the event CE, which I didn't finish since it required one to drop. Now that I think about it, I didn't finish the Nero one either because it required one to drop as well. In October came the Great Halloween event, the first of its kind, featuring its own unique map and the first free servant ever to be given out, Caster Elizabeth. This in itself made the event a prize for many people because at this point in the game, it was incredibly difficult to pull a 4-star servant, let alone a 5-star. This event caused some great issues in that they wanted to run some guerrilla events during the time frame. Basically, guerrilla events were a certain time frame in which a special battle would open up for 1 hour out of the day to gather more resources for the event shop. Sadly, the servers were not exactly up to par for that many people trying to play at once, and we had outages. Many outages. This was also the first event to introduce the Apple system, which is a means to regen your AP without using quartz. The event in itself wasn't too terribly difficult, and it had some fun times with Uncle Vlad making costumes for monsters and Camilla wanting to die but Kiyohime not allowing her to. During this event, I got my first 5-star servant, Vlad Tepish. 2 days after, I got my Caster Elizabeth, who was a decent servant for her time, especially for me who ran a critical based team. The craft essence was also very good, but sadly I wasn't able to finish this one either. After Halloween, we got our first story update with Oceanos. Here, Elure finally became drawable from the gacha with a handful of new servants featuring pirates and more Greeks who wanted to assassinate my phone. Here, I ran the Gorgon sisters. In the end, I was rewarded with a Mary and Anne. It also opened a node for me to form plumes, but they never came. Next, we have the Honoji event, starring the Guda Guda Order main duo Oda Nobunaga and Okita Soji. This was a great event because it was the first free servant in the Knights class. Archers back in the day were rare to come by. I mean, there was Garcher, but he's kind of bad. Like, really bad, and to this day, it's still pretty bad. The craft essence in itself was pretty useful, and had a pretty funny 4-coma posted on it. But the real prize of the event actually came in the gacha, in the form of Okita, a limited 5-star servant who apparently will not come back. This is for good reason because I feel like she was a mistake made by the Lightworks in servant balancing. She was absolutely game-breaking at the time. I would have considered the event a success with just Nobunaga, but I would have felt a bit empty without her cohort Okita in tow. It was thanks to a friend's generosity that I was able to roll for her. Afterwards, we got a mini event that introduced Skaha. I still don't have Skaha to this day. Next came the Christmas event with yet another free servant that no one actually expected. Many assumed that it would be Nero since she had a skit with her pretending to be Santa, but instead we got Santa Alter, and in turn Santa Alter made us her reindeer. The event was the first to use the event gacha box system. Many screwed this up since they were tunnel visioned on the altar cards to up her noble phantasm, when in reality the boxes themselves were a great source for skill crystals and QP and were incredibly easy to clear out. Santa Alter herself was really good for a Rider class servant, and she still retained her ability to nuke a wave like her Saber counterpart. The craft essence itself was great for Okita because she really needed to be stronger at this point in time of the game. And we also got the introduction of Jack the Ripper and Nursery Rhyme. After Christmas came our second story update, London. London introduced many new servants and a few new enemy types. It provided a bit more challenge in the previous chapters, and I can genuinely say that the final battles were a lot more fun. Sadly, I wouldn't see a lot of these new servants for myself since I couldn't really pull them. In the midst of all this, the New Year's came. It gave us a few things, some CEs and whatnot, but the biggest draw from it was the paid 10 draw that guaranteed a 5-star servant. I took a gamble on this to finally get Altera, and sadly, as some of you know, I pulled a Pendragon. This utterly devastated me to the point of not wanting to play the game anymore. I personally don't like Pendragon, and I never wish to acquire her at any point. After London came the Saber Wars event. An event that was surrounded by Pendragons. In any case, this was the event that marked the pre-registration servant Saber Lily's in-exclusivity to those who pre-registered. As for Saber Lily herself, she's a 3-star masquerading as a 4-star. She's bad. Really bad. Her and her silly nutshot tickle me laser. This event also introduced Mystery Heroine X, a character who pretty much pokes fun at the fact that developers knew they were adding too many sabers and that she was there to kill them all. There were 2 CEs in the event, both pretty meh. Afterwards, I spent upwards to about 80 courts to farm out a max limit broken Mona Lisa CE for future money farming. And to this day, I have no regrets on doing such a thing. During this time, we also got the Brynhilde trial event. It was during this that I decided that I really wanted a high level servant I could get behind, and I started to throw my courts at the game like crazy. And on the last 4 that I could possibly get, I rolled and freaked as I dropped my phone. In that roll, I missed the glory of her arrival in card form, but she finally wanted to me, my darling Altera, 7 days before Valentine's, and to me that was the best gift I could have ever gotten. I never mentioned this on my channel, but the training process for the girl was interesting. Since I ran out of quartz and apples by the time she was level 88, I did her final 2 levels with nothing but cards I got from the friend point gacha. It was torture, but it was worth it for her. The Valentine's event. This event was something else since how much you could actually do, and it was based upon how many female servants you actually had during the event. We'd basically farm out chocolate coins to get chocolates from our servants. They had their cute little stories attached to them as well. These chocolates actually were craft essence feed bait, but I could never bring myself to get rid of them, and still have all of them to this day, even the Pendragon ones, even if I don't care for them. Right after this, we got our first collab, the Garden of Order, a collaboration with Type Moon's Kado no Kyokai, the Garden of Sinners. This is the first event to introduce the Order system, a series of missions that needed to be completed before you could progress further in the storyline. A lot of the players were having issues figuring out where to go to get these things done, especially when it came to Rapunzel. That thing was a pain to find if you didn't have the parking lot open to you. This event gave the free servant Dyogi Shiki. She's considered to be one of the best 4-star assassins in the game. The gacha itself contained 5-star Shiki, who basically did the same thing, just in AoE fashion. Afterwards, we got 2 mini events with Amaxashiro, Gilko, and Astafalo. These were really nothing to write home about, just some trial quests to try them out and to pull them. Along with it came the White Day event, which again was nothing special. All it was Da Vinci giving us a pick ticket to pick one of the available craft essences during White Day. Next came our first expert event with the Count of Monte Cristo, featuring the Count himself, Edmond Dantes, the first Avenger. It was actually pretty challenging to have to fight him since he could dish out so much damage. We also got our first glimpse at the next player of the storyline, Nightingale, who was called Mercedes during the time. America came, and boy was that a challenge. With the new servants and mob type, I grew into liking Nightingale during this time, and she became my next focus on 5-star servants that I had to have. After this, we had our first chance to try out Da Vinci in the Counterfeit event. This event featured 2 gacha boxes, still pretty easy to clear out, with a few CEs with it. The big prize was actually the gacha servant Jean Alter. She became an Avenger at this point and was pretty much the hardest hitting servant stat-wise. Next we have our special event, Fate Excelsior Order. This event introduced the much anticipated Rider class servant, Iskander. I remember the fiasco surrounding the event when it was shown that we wouldn't be receiving a free servant at the end of it. People called it a waste of time until, surprise, we got an iris wheel. They also updated the Fem Point gacha with a new servant, the Avenger Angramayu. He's probably the hardest servant to get in the game, but in all actuality, he's pretty dang bad and it's just a trophy. Now we come to the Ibaraki Doji event. This was their first attempt at a raid style battle and it was generally a flop. The event battle was incredibly difficult in itself and required having a certain setup to even stand a chance at fighting it. This event also introduced Shuten Doji, who everyone seemed to love her design. Next we had an event that was pretty dear to me, Sanzo's Journey to the West. I grew up on the story, so I was really attached to it. This event featured 3 CEs that only 2 of them I actually finished. It also introduced our first look into the next story chapter with Sanzo, who I also have on my list of 5-star servants I want in the game. Afterwards was the Onigashima event, the second attempt at a raid battle, and this one actually went a lot smoother. The previous issue I had with raid points not being counted towards you if you died was resolved, but it also had its own shares of issues. That being that for a newbie friendly event, its tier prizes were impossible for newer players to acquire. Realizing their mistakes, they gave out the lighters at a lower level, of 1 million being the final lighter rather than 1.8 million. The prize servants of the events came twofold, one being the free servant of Kintoki, who is basically Berserker Kintoki but in writer form, the other being the gacha exclusive 5-star Berserker Yorimitsu, who for some reason everyone hated her design, even though they love shooting dojis. It's just how the artist draws, and I don't get it. And as a fan of Raita's work, I'm actually pretty sad I didn't pull either of the 2 servants he designed. We finally have our release of Camelot. This chapter was actually pretty fun with all the strange boss stipulations and whatnot, and we get to the summer event. This is probably the only event I got off pretty well with my rolls. I managed to get Anne, Marie Antoinette, yet another Pendragon. We also got a free Skaha for our troubles. And this pretty much catches us up to where we are now. And our next event, a collab. Although I don't consider it a collab since it's still Type Moon, but they call it a collab, so it's a collab. Kaleido Ilia. Dry, was it? Well, it's another raid event, so we'll see how it goes. Sorry this took so long, there's a lot to cover in a year. If I decide to continue videos like this, I'll try to do them after each event or story chapter. That way they're not as long. In any case, this has been Cell, and thank you for tuning in and sticking with me.